When talking about legendary emperors in Chinese history, we can't help but mention the first emperor of Ming Dynasty, Zhu Yuan Zhang. Going from a starved farmer to a founding emperor, Zhu had also taken on the roles of monk, soldier, and general during his lifetime. Now let's dive into the fascinating story of Zhu's rise into power. Zhu Yuanzhang was born in Fengyang, Anhui Province in 1328. His birth name, Zhu Chongba, was given because he was the eighth paternal cousin of his family. Zhu was born into a destitute farmer's household at the end of Yuan Dynasty. At the time, the government was corrupt and people lived in extreme misery. In order to earn a living, Zhu started grazing cattle for a landlord at a young age. Because of his intelligence and resourcefulness, Zhu became the leader of a group of cowherd children. As a little game, he would often tell his friends to perform a kowtow to him and call him Your Majesty. No one would have thought that such an absurd game would turn into reality in a few decades. In 1344, there was a massive drought in northern Anhui. After the drought came a wave of locusts, and then widespread plague. Unfortunately, Zhu Yuanzhang's parents and eldest brother all died of the plague. Him and his second oldest brother wanted to bury them, but they had neither the money to buy coffins nor the land for burial. So they went to the landlord for help. But not only did the landlord not help them, but he yelled at them and drove them away. Zhu and his brother returned home, and upon seeing their loved ones' bodies, cried out loudly in anguish. Later, a neighbor pitied them and allowed them to bury the corpses in his graveyard. The Zhu brothers found some pieces of worn-out clothes and wrapped them around the bodies, using them as coffins. Back then in Fengyang, the starved civilians wandered around looking for food, and eventually devoured all the barks and grass roots. Countless people died of starvation every day. Having no alternative, Zhu Yuanzhang and his brother separated and looked for food on their own. The 17-year-old Zhu sought refuge by becoming a monk at Huangjue Temple, thinking that he wouldn't starve there. But in less than 2 months, Zhu was notified that there was no longer enough food in the temple, and in order to survive, the monks had to travel around and beg for alms, so Zhu once again became a beggar. Over the next 3 years, Zhu Yuanzhang's footsteps could be found all over Anhui and the surrounding areas. This experience broadened Zhu's horizon as he was exposed to the local cultures and customs. He gained more social experiences, and most importantly, he came into contact with anti-Yuan ideas, which made him realize that he could revolt against Yuan's brutal rule. 3 years later, Zhu Yuanzhang returned to Huangjue Temple and resumed a peaceful life as a monk. Then in 1351, the Red Scarf Army uprising broke out, and in the following few months, it quickly spread to various places over the country. In 1352, a landlord named Guo Zixin revolted with tens of thousands of people and conquered Fengyang. You may ask, why would the landlord give up his enormous wealth and rebel? Well, landlords also lived pretty miserably at the end of Yuan Dynasty. Guo Zixin was constantly extorted by the local government and revolted to seek revenge. One of Zhu Yuanzhang's childhood friends, Tang He, joined Guo's army and sent a letter to invite Zhu Yuanzhang to join. Upon receiving the letter, Zhu Yuanzhang could not make up his mind about leaving and went to a fortune teller. The fortune teller told him that he should revolt, and thinking that he should follow God's will, the 25-year-old Zhu decided to leave the temple and join Guo Zixin's force. Due to his bravery and flexibility, Zhu Yuanzhang was well liked by Guo Zixin and was soon promoted. Whenever Zhu commanded an expedition, he would charge at the front of the army and return in triumph. Despite his enormous contributions, Zhu was never greedy for the credits, and instead always claimed that the victory was the result of everyone's hard work. He would always hand in the spoils of war to Guo Zixin as well. Shortly after, Zhu reached the position of vice general, and he received a lot of support from all the officers and soldiers. Zhu Yuanzhang has completed the transformation from monk to general, and over the coming years he would start to contend for the control of the country.